Good morning and welcome. I'm Rafael Reif, MIT's president, and I'm delighted to be with you this morning. Before we get started, I would like to thank the people whose hard work and dedication have brought us together for this important conversation. MIT React and JWell, Naamal, Quran Foundation, and Paper Airplanes. In a moment, you will hear from Sanjay Sarma, who directs open learning initiatives at MIT. But first, I would like to share a few thoughts on pathways to education, livelihood, and hope, a topic that is very close to my heart. I come from a family of refugees. In 1938, my parents fled Eastern Europe and arrived in South America. First in Ecuador, and then they settled in Venezuela. They had nothing. They did not speak the language. They were poor, and they knew no one. In the land they came from, they had no access to education. Yet they instilled in my brothers and me a deep appreciation for the value of learning. When I was little, I remember my father telling me often, get an education, because when you have to leave in a hurry, education is all you can take with you. I've carried that lesson with me my entire life. Of course, when I was pursuing my education, most of the technological tools that we have taken for granted were years away. I could not have predicted that digital learning would transform the way we teach and the way we learn. For refugees and other displaced people, digital learning can be a lifeline. Remote education offers opportunities to begin a new academic journey or return to one that has been disrupted. The work that you are doing empowers people who have lost almost everything to gain new knowledge and skills, to rebuild their lives, to lift up their communities, and above all, to envision a better future. Now let me introduce our speaker. At MIT, I'm known for being a bit understated. So I'm really not qualified to introduce the highly engaging, energetic, and charismatic Sanjay Sarma, MIT's Vice President for Open Learning. I will say just a few words and then let his brilliance speak for itself. For the past 10 years, Sanjay's vision has guided MIT's efforts to transform teaching and learning. But his influence extends well beyond MIT. He's also a trusted advisor of national governments and global companies. And today, he will share his wisdom with us. Sanjay?
Thank you, Rafael, for a very moving introduction. I just wanted to, first of all, make sure that my slides were showing, which is usually a good way to start a presentation. Does that show?
Yes,
Right,
sir.
thank you. Thank you, Rafael. So I just, we'll begin with this picture. This is a picture of a gentleman by the name of Muhammad Anis. This is in Aleppo, Syria. In the ruins of Aleppo, a photographer by the name of Joseph Eid took a picture of him smoking his pipe, listening to his music, clinging to his intellectual pursuit as chaos reigned around him. This was a picture in the New York Times that was seen around the world, and I have a framed copy in my office. I want to start with my own journey, and I want to echo what Rafael said. Mine is also a journey of migration, but it is different in a couple of ways. I arrived in this country 30-something years ago with the $840. I had a suitcase, which I had packed with clothes, toothbrush, etc. But there was something I did not carry with me. I did not carry a history of trauma. I came from a happy place. I was very lucky. I came with a family I could telephone. with friends who could support me. I spent my first couple of nights on the couches of friends. I came with a passport. It's so easy to take them for granted, but I had a passport. I could show who I was. And I came with, perhaps the most important thing, to quote Rafael, my degree. I didn't leave in a hurry, but really, if I look back on my own journey, it started there. It started with my degree, with my education. And I certainly don't want to, in any way, say that the other two givens that I had are any less important, maybe more important. I did have a passport, and I did not come from a place of trauma. You will hear more about that soon. There are efforts to address some of these really pressing problems, such as the self-sovereign identity effort in the W3C, World Wide Consortium, and other places. Trauma, how does one really take on trauma? Admir will talk about it a little bit later, but we have tried some things with some success. The Jameel World Education Lab worked with Save the Children. The Compassionate Systems Lab worked with the Save the Children to try and address some aspects of trauma. And of course, philanthropy and agencies whose generosity supports people who arrive in this country or in any country from faraway places is something we can never, ever underestimate, because they didn't have that suitcase and they didn't have those $850, $840. But I'm going to focus my talk today a little bit more on the education piece. So I had a degree. What is a degree? The word degree, by the way, has its roots in gradient. It's a Latin root. You climb a gradient, and as you climb a gradient, you have achievements. Your degree consists of spending time in college, extensive seat time on campus. And for that, you receive a degree. But this is very fundamental. You have to be on campus. And that's usually during working hours. Right there is a moment of privilege, an exclusion of those who don't have the privilege of being able to skip work. Your degree is certification. It's person achievement. It's a link. And if you look at a credential, and I show you this is a fake credential I found on the internet, but the point is to describe what a credential is. It links three things. It links the university where you graduated from. It links your name. Someone checked your passport. And it gives you, confers on you a degree, in this case, a Bachelor of Arts with a major in internet communication. There's so much unwritten context in that credentializes you and establishes you so that you're a documented participant in an economy. It's the undocumentation, partly, that is the problem, as we know, with recent history in this country. Hopefully, a degree also implies learning. What is learning really? Well, it's content in terms of courses. And if you look at a transcript, you have a lot of courses. You have introduction to learning, you have internet design, a list of courses, a bundle of courses taken over a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years when you didn't work. That's one of the assumptions in a degree. Hopefully, if you were lucky enough to go to a good college, you have personal growth. Too often, education is not about personal growth. How to handle yourself. You become mature. You develop resiliency. You develop relationships. You understand the humanities. You understand human beings, history, geography, sociology. More and more today, it's becoming important to learn things like teamwork, leadership. Teamwork, because especially in our emerging gig economy, many of us will become parts of a bigger team, a bigger machine that's achieving a lot together. And leadership, because we're all going to have to become leaders and followers in team activities. And hopefully we learn work skills and we have earning potential. because in the end, we do have to feed our families. So that's what a degree really confers on us, and that's what it entails. But if you go through each one of those, let's take extensive seat time on campus. That implies you can be on campus. And that is not a luxury that the vast majority of humanity had even 50 years ago. And it is not a luxury that we can assume of most people, even in affluent countries, in affluent settings. For example, if they're working, if they have children, they have to earn a living. They're on a treadmill. They can't really go sit in a campus. And to Rafael's great point, this is where online education has been so revolutionary. You know, I like to say that the 21st century did not begin in 2000 or 2001. The 21st century actually began in 2021. In 2000 and 2001, we already had Google and Amazon. It is in 2021 that we all had to hang by this one thread, technology. But 10 years ago, we at MIT and other places started pushing forward with online education and online certificates and online micro-credentials, which meant that working professionals, even in affluent countries, people who had jobs could continue to upgrade their skills and stay healthy on the treadmill of life, rather than stopping and falling off the end of the treadmill. So online education fundamentally makes it possible for people who cannot take off work to also breathe the oxygen that we call education. The challenge right now is degrees are monolithic. They're like those gigantic rocks at Stonehenge or in other megalithic sites. What we need is a much more granular version of education. Bricks, which were invented several thousand years ago. We don't have that yet really formally and extensively in education. And we believe the future of education is more granular with more micro-credentials. We invented a couple. One of them is called the MicroMasters. And MIT itself has more than 1 million people enrolled in its MicroMasters. And there are more than 50 MicroMasters from over 26 universities on 5 continents today. And the thing about the MicroMasters is it is designed and more accessible for any population in transition. And transition is upon us. Economic transition, job transition, national transition. Migration is an extreme, sometimes, version of transition. So let's look at other parts of a degree. What about certification? How do you link a person and an achievement? Again, what we have today is either you go to university, you show your passport, you get enrolled, you spend several years, and you get a degree, or you get an online certificate and you can't really prove whether you really got it. How do you prove it? So to address that, MIT and a bunch of universities launched something called the Digital Credentials Consortium. For several years now, MIT has been associating its regular degrees with a blockchain, on the blockchain, a link, so that you can actually, an employer can click on your degree, link, and prove that you have a degree. That was a sort of a learning experience. And we have now launched a second version of that, which is to make it granular enough and inexpensive enough that it can work with any online credential. So now if you're a refugee and you left a country, the leader of that country or the government cannot take your degree away or cannot take your certificate away. Or if you come to a new country, Poland, say, or Lesbos in Greece, or if you're in Bangladesh, if you're a Rohingya, or if you're an Afghan in Pakistan or in Iran, you can take an online certificate. You can take an online course, get a certificate, and you will get the proof that it's you, combined with other identity mechanisms, potentially like this self-sovereign identity. We're not coupled to that, but it could be that. So you can reconstitute not just yourself, but also continue to progress, because that vacuum, that abyss, cannot be something that we take for granted in a world in which migration will become more real and continuous. Now, I don't want to give the impression that learning is somehow only about doing things online. MIT's logo has a man with a sledgehammer on it, because we really believe in learning in person. Now, if you don't have access to learning, a glass half empty, there's still water. But if you can have the other half of the glass, which is in person, we think it makes all the difference. And that's very central to our thinking. So let's look at learning from that perspective. So the point is online is good, but it is not the panacea. So obviously you can take content online from courses, but what about personal growth, teamwork, leadership, the in-person stuff? So MIT introduced something many years ago called boot camps. So the idea is a group of people who've taken online courses who get together, and together they learn how to solve problems using their learnings in a team setting. It's sort of a guided hackathon is what we call it. Erdine Beshimov, himself a refugee and an MIT alum, and the leader of this program within Open Learning, developed this. And here, students, whether it's entrepreneurship and innovation or medical devices, get together and actually solve real problems. And this is Admir, who you'll see in a few minutes, who ran a boot camp in Jordan for refugees from mostly Syria, but other parts of the world as well, in that first version. And the self-efficacy that this results in is magical. It's really hard to put a finger on it, because taking online courses online is great, but the other half of that half full glass does make a difference. What about work skills and earning potential? That's a big deal too. We believe deeply at MIT that education is not just online, it's in person, but we also believe that real work gives you a lot of very important skills. And that is apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are not new. Europe's had apprenticeships for several hundred years. In the trades, even in America, we have it. Most trades have some form of apprenticeship. But apprenticeship is also a first step, a stepping stone into real work. And that's something that if we can systematically entrain into the education system, it creates on-ramps for students, not just to learn in theory, not just to learn in a group in a boot camp, but also to learn at work, develop the context for work, the context for work, the first step into a job, and most importantly, confidence and self-efficacy, apprenticeships. So all these things together become what we call Agile Continuous Education, ACE. And this is a movement that we're launching at MIT. It builds on three things. One is online credentials. So the idea is that, let us say you are working in an airline company and your boss says, listen, cybersecurity is becoming more important. I want you to learn about cybersecurity. Are you really going to quit your job or go away when you're married and you have 2 kids and get this degree in cybersecurity? More likely, the future in the 21st century, which, as I said, began last year, is going to be that you take an online course and then a bunch of online courses, and you get a credential in cybersecurity. It's an agile approach. The workforce is becoming agile, and education needs to become agile too. Well, now you learned it theoretically. What do you do next? Well, maybe you do a little hackathon with a bunch of your fellow students, and you take on simulated problems, not real problems. You're not ready for that yet. And maybe you say, listen, here's a threat profile. How do you address it? How do you react? It's a week-long thing. This is what we call boot camps. You learn teamwork, you learn group problem solving. Okay, you did that. Then what do you do? Well, now you come back to your company. Well, you never left your company to begin with because you did this in the evenings, remember? The online credentials were in the evenings. Teamwork boot camps is a week away at best, but you might even do it on weekends. Then you come back to the company and your boss says, okay, we have a couple of experts. You're going to work with one of them as an apprentice. And you work with this person for a few months. And in the course of the job, you learn some real world skills. You learn what threats look like in your region. You learn what the specific issues are that your company faces with cybersecurity threats. You learn the mitigation strategies that your company uses or should use. And at the end of it, what you have is a baked set of abilities that transcend just a degree, in fact, or just an online certificate. And you never left your job, but you are now able to practice. This, to me personally, and to us at Open Learning, is the treadmill of education that all of us need to be on. But for populations who have migrated, they have no choice. This may be the only treadmill that we might be able to create so that they can continue to progress. As we say in Urdu, taraqi, which is progress, and give them that opportunity. Now, this might seem like something designed for the gig economy in America, but I just wanted to remind you that ACE was born in Amman, Jordan, when Admir and Lana and others were doing amazing stuff with refugees who had few options. It's amazing how constraints force us to innovate. And those same innovations are not just for the developing world or for some disadvantaged population. That same innovation is just as good for us in the developed world, in the settled world. There's a term for it. It's called reverse innovation. A lot of technologies and a lot of industries have been through it. And now it's time for education to learn from it. Our work with refugees has given us an extraordinary periscope into the future. Migration will become a bigger challenge for all of humanity, as we know. And of course, climate migration, I'm going to just click on this and hopefully the link works. Climate migration is the other thing that's going to happen here. Let me just push this up. This is from the New York Times, showing climate stress and migrating populations, hotspots where people will not be able to live. It's a vast fraction of humanity impacted. And so that is upon us. And if we don't innovate, we're going to find ourselves painted into a very, very sad, unfortunate, and irreversible corner. So I will end with that and just say that it's a pleasure and an honor to speak with my colleagues and friends who have cared deeply, but more importantly, acted deeply to take on such an important challenge. And I want to come back to my president, Rafael Reif, who inspired this work 20 years ago, 10 years ago, with the creation of Open Learning, and just by being who he is, because he himself comes from a family of refugees. So thank you very much, and back to you, Lana.
Thank you, Vice President Sanjay Sarma, for your inspiring charge and insight into the ways MIT is rethinking education for the needs of our present and our future, and building new opportunities for displaced communities through flexible and agile education pathways. I am Lana Cook, Assistant Director of Strategic Initiatives here at MIT Open Learning, where I manage the MIT Refugee Action Hub, or REACT, and I'm co-chair of the Migration Summit, of which this event is part. In this second half, we'll hear from a panel of faculty and learners who exhibit how MIT is opening up these pathways to education, livelihood, and hope. I will introduce each speaker individually and ask each to share their journey and how it informs the work they do in empowering displaced communities of learners to build new futures. First, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Azra Akšamija, an artist and architectural historian, director of the MIT Future Heritage Lab, an associate professor in the Department of Architecture, and director of the Art, Culture, and Technology program. In her multidisciplinary practice, she investigates the potency of art and architecture to facilitate the processes of transformative mediation in cultural or political conflicts, and in doing so, provide a framework for researching, analyzing, and intervening in contested social political realities. Her recent work focuses on representation of Islamic identities in the West, spatial mediation of identity politics, and cultural pedagogy through art and architecture. Azra, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Will you share the story of your journey and what led you to your work?
Thank you so much for this wonderful introduction, Lana, and it's an honor to be here and to speak to all of you about some of the work we have been doing. As Lana introduced me, I was thinking about kind of what journey I should share, and on my personal side, I'm someone who comes from Bosnia and Herzegovina, a country that in the 90s experienced war and genocide. And with my family, we were forced to exile from our country, and I've experienced life in exile and lived in many different places and can empathize with situations. But today I will not talk about my personal story, but really about the story of how I got to collaborate and work with Syrian refugees and use MIT's platform and our wonderful community to see what could be the ways in which we could impact and support communities affected by conflict and crisis. So let me just share my screen. You see the full image, right? Okay, so I run the MIT Future Heritage Lab, which is an interdisciplinary laboratory of artists, designers, architects, planners working together across borders and both disciplinary and geographical borders to really bring together two seemingly disconnected issues, the issue of cultural destruction and issue of forced displacement. And what we do is to use the lens and methods of participatory art and co-creation, for example, to bring the needs and bridge these needs of humanitarian aid with needs of cultural preservation and cultural resilience. So over the past 5 years, we have been working in the Syrian refugee camp in Jordan called Azraq, and also the Zaatari refugee camp. These are huge camps housing, Azraq is more than 35,000 people. Zaatari more than 90,000 people. Average life in, as we know, in refugee camps is more than 18 years. So these camps are planned usually as a kind of temporary solutions, but people end up living there. And at the same time, places where one comes from are destroyed. There's a lack of cultural infrastructure in the camps, even though Jordan has been really one of the most supportive countries compared to the Western rich nations that would have much more means to support refugees. Not everything can be accommodated. So there is no regular access to education. And the question is also what can be taught. So, and where is it that, technology also could play a role, and people like us coming from very distant places, how can we be useful? So this question of technology was one kind of dilemma we had to deal with when reaching out to these places is how do you bring yourself in or connect to these places, let's say with digital education or kind of exchanges across the web when there is no internet access or not even electricity. When we started working in the camp, there was literally no electricity, but also access to internet is kind of limited and censored. When we think about this same question in the context of cultural preservation, one also has to be mindful about colonial dynamics that might get perpetuated in us reaching out to these places. Who owns technologies and know-how is a kind of political question that implies certain power relationship that one has to be wary of and mindful, and what are the kinds of biases and power dynamics one brings into those fragile places. Now, looking at the camps themselves and this question of how can cultural realms support cultural resilience of communities affected by forced displacement, we find examples like of a kind of future heritage lab in Zaatari camp, for example, where a bunch of men have organized themselves to work through the lens of cultural heritage from Syria, for example, here building models of Palmyra art with kebab sticks and mud. But often in the humanitarian realm, you find use of heritage kind of feeding into either nostalgia for something that was lost. It is a vehicle very potent for healing of communities, but there is not always a cultural transfer and transfer of knowledge between generations. And that's where we saw an opportunity to see, okay, what we could do from the outside is to, on the one hand, work with the people together to not kind of design for them, but to learn from them and to see what could be actually unlearned about the ways which we address humanitarian aid. And then kind of where art and co-creation and kind of knowledge from the people could be used and deployed to improve the way in which we collectively as a humanity respond to these crises. And this work was recently published in the book Designed to Live, Everyday Inventions from a Refugee Camp, where we work with more than 70 students from MIT, from Jordan, German Jordanian University, and from Azra Refugee Camp, various youth groups, to document inventions created by Syrian refugees. Here you see Abu Zuhair, who created this wonderful airplane-like toys for kids using insulation, thermal insulation, core relief items. Here you see an example of this like a water fountain made out of plastic buckets and a kind of shisha pipe used for water piping. Then with students, design students at MIT, we reverse engineered these inventions to learn from them. And what we learned was that it's kind of interesting, what are the basically what is considered as essential human needs are not what one thinks they are. Like this water fountain is about the sound of water in the heat of the desert, or this sound castle that was made by collecting different types of soil across the camp to challenge the paradigms of humanitarian aid based on ideas of efficiency and that are kind of engineering principles, right? When you have a huge crisis, thousands of people coming per day, you have to support them, address them, and then one comes with this kind of one-fit-all solutions that puts people in white steel boxes that are heated in the summer in this unbearable desert heat. And you have here this other kind of shelter that was built reminiscent of the Palmyra Arch in Syria, but also local Syrian heritage, where this piece works as a reminder that what cultural shelter is something that addresses emotional needs of people and cultural needs of people, educational needs. And these kinds of projects are really powerful for education, both in the camp itself, where knowledge transfer happens between generations, but also education about crisis zones that we also all need to be aware about. As Sanjay mentioned, the crises are going to be expanding, and the numbers of displaced people and the climate crisis. So here for us, it was important to think not just about this kind of useful of technology, but also the ethics of collaboration and inserting yourself in these kinds of environments and collaborating with people that are displaced. For us, it was important to develop a model that is kind of outlining that transdisciplinary collaboration can be possible. Everyone can pitch in different type of skill and life experience and learn something. So everyone is learning and teaching at the same time in multiple directions. And knowledge transfer across generations is important and is an untapped resource, I would say, in the camps, because in places where you do have laptops and internet access, still refugee learners cannot reach them because of security reasons. Laptops are under locker. So it's really the elders of these communities that take on the role of giving some form of education where the formal education fails. And I think that's something one could tap into and develop further and support. In any case, I call all of us to kind of think about this cultural paradigm and educational and emotional needs in refugee camps as a huge opportunities for all of us to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Azra. I'm excited for us to dive into conversation, and because I think what you really highlight there around transcultural, transdisciplinary collaboration that can be possible with communities. really touches on, not only what Sanjay was speaking to in terms of how do we imagine new kinds of education futures, but what we'll hear next from Dr. Admir Masic. So Dr. Admir Masic is an associate professor of civil and environmental engineering and faculty founder of the MIT Refugee Action Hub React, an institute-wide effort to develop global education programs that target the needs of underserved communities, including refugees, migrants, and economically disadvantaged populations. Professor Masic's research focuses on the development of high-performance in situ and multi-scale characterization techniques to investigate complex hierarchical organized materials. His group explores ancient technologies as a source of inspiration for the development of a new generation of durable and sustainable building materials. I'm pleased to welcome you, Admir, to the stage.
Thank you, Lana, for the kind introduction. And thank you all for joining us here. I would like to really thank Sanjay and President Reif to make a core of this meeting today. And thank you, Azra, for sharing your great experience in the refugee camps. Today, I would like to talk about the importance of education and how it somehow also shaped my personal journey. I'm also a former refugee from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I spent about 4 years as a refugee in Croatia, where basically I was not allowed to go to school, which definitely allowed me to play a lot of ping pong and become quite good ping pong player, even though I'm 6'5" tall. So and just because of incredible persistence of my mom and the importance of one certificate that I had with me from Bosnia of my completion of middle schools, we managed to convince together with my crying mom, a principal of a high school to let me audit classes. And this basically turned my days from, playing ping pong to solving chemistry equations and problems. And that definitely shaped somehow my trajectory and also allowed me to really believe that there is a hope in such a difficult condition that can be being a refugee. And so that eventually, really, that hard work led me to win an like city chemistry Olympiads of this little city in Croatia called Rijeka, and then I was invited to participate to the national competitions, and after a few years, I basically became one of the best young chemists of entire Croatia, and then as I got more popular and famous in my refugee camp at my school, Italian volunteers eventually suggested this opportunity to maybe move to Italy and start my university degree in chemistry, and so everything else is the history. What I wanted to stress here is the importance of the fact that indeed education gave me hope and gave me a path for a better future, and also the importance of a certificate, which you also learned from Sanjay's plenary talk. So now I want to switch gears and talk about COVID, because indeed COVID somehow radically affected our education, and we became universally kind of ready to receive digital education, which also, showed together with MOOCs, this online courses that there are many challenges about digital only content, and we are learning that indeed, and Sanjay nicely stressed that that's the only one of the pillars. But due to COVID and through MIT React, we also learned that there is an opportunity to reach so many more individuals and deliver high impact certified content anywhere in the world. That picture from Jordan is a picture of our maybe 20 students that joined that boot camp in Jordan. But imagine the challenge of bringing all the refugees from different parts of the world to Jordan was an incredible challenge for us. And with COVID, we actually, explore the opportunity, and that's what the Erdin Bashimov definitely did with the boot camps, to create online boot camps. And that online boot camp eventually allowed us to really create also that component of personal growth and teamwork that can be delivered anywhere in the world. These efforts and COVID effects eventually really somehow gave us important insights on the importance of the digital education. And you heard from Sanjay this concept of the glass half empty of water, but maybe is a glass half full, and unprecedented opportunity for us to bring water to those thirsty for education through digital world. And there are many people around the world that are really thirsty. So through MIT React programs, we are learning how to make education a vessel for a better life. We are creating new models of education that can holistically support vulnerable and marginalized learners, and open this new concept really of agile continuous education pathways to new knowledge that I truly believe will serve a better world through creating a backbone of communities that are displaced, marginalized, and stuck in space and time. So I think I will stop here, and definitely looking forward to have a conversation around these topics.
Thank you, Admir, for sharing your journey and our work in React and in empowering these communities of learners to new futures. I'd love to now introduce Pavel Ilin, MIT React alumni and software engineer at the New York City Mayor's Office. Pavel earned a master's degree at the State Academic University of Humanities and was accepted to the PhD program at the Moscow State Institute of Culture. In 2021, as an MIT React learner, he received the MIT Certificate in Computer and Data Science and Certificate of Completion of the MIT Innovation Leadership Bootcamp. He is interested in intelligence augmentation, knowledge management, and overcoming othering. Pavel, I'm honored to have you join us today.
Thank you so much, Lana, for introduction. It's a great privilege and honor to be here. And a little bit on my own story, transition from traditional education system and overcoming barriers of this system here in the US. In a moment of departure from Russia, I was deeply engaged in this educational system. I got my bachelor's in 2012, my master's 2014. In 2016, I finished the second year of a PhD program, and I had a job on campus, and I was preparing for taking on a professor role in the university after defending the thesis. So the future was pretty much lined up for me. But for multiple reasons, it wasn't safe for me to stay in a country, and I have to leave Russia and seek new life elsewhere. When I came to the US, I have to start from scratch and improvise. I didn't have my diplomas or any other proof of my education. I couldn't even prove that I graduated high school. First several years in New York, I worked in a bakery just to ensure my physical survival. It was clear that the traditional education system is bad for me. But as Sanjay mentioned, like, they may take away your degrees, your papers, but your knowledge, your skills, and your mindset formed by your educational journey will always stay with you. And my thirst for learning was still alive. So I started looking for alternatives, and I was blessed to find the MIT React. And it wasn't easy to get in. The MIT React is a very competitive program. I think in 2021 cohort, for 50 spots, 700 people was competing. So it's there's nothing easy in life. And even though React didn't give you the formal degree, it gives you a certificate, but it's not a formal degree. What's important for me, React was producing is hope for those who left behind. And I was seen for who I am without formal proof, without requirements to show your hard copy diploma evaluated by some other agency. And this fact that I've been seen for just being there, being present in the moment, being present physically in space, just give me hope that not everything is lost, that it's possible to succeed. There's a chances. And also React, it's MIT React. And when you go to look for jobs, employers look for this keywords, this brand buzzwords as MIT. And when I add MIT to my LinkedIn, to my resume, the recruiters from Amazon and other companies start contacting me like, hey, you just graduated MIT, let's work for us. So giving access to this shiny educational brand can empower displaced and marginalized communities to go and achieve something. So I think I will stop at this point. And yes, thank you so much. And I want to encourage everyone who's watching and who wanted to go and apply for MIT for next cohort, please do that.
Thank you so much, Pavel. I'd love now in our closing moments to really invite Pavel, Admir, Azra to join me in a conversation. Today's session really is focused around the central question around how can universities and education institutions like MIT create new pathways to education, to livelihood and hope. And so I'd love to invite my panelists here to reflect on that question. Azra, might we start with you?
Of course. Well, I think what was outlined today is quite powerful. I mean, I spoke about the ethics of intervention, right? And I think that the Open Learning Initiative and React have done an incredible move actually towards addressing the core of the issue, which is certifications. Right? And one of the main things we faced when we worked in these camps, and we came and kind of, let's pitch this course and we could contribute this. And there are many universities trying to find a way in, and people want to connect and can contribute, but there is a systemic issue. How can they contribute and towards what end? So if you are one professor or one group of people from one university, what do you do, right? And So in some of the workshops we had with the refugees, they would say, well, I took a course from this university in pharmacy and this in mathematics and this in art. What do I do with that? It doesn't amount to any kind of curriculum, and I can have maybe a certificate from one workshop, but nothing, it's not a degree. And I think these mini certificates that React is doing are quite a powerful support, because they do open pathways on the job market. But I think also as MIT, we could do more, and there are platforms like University of Geneva with InZone, education in crisis zones, doing something like that. I mean, there are possibilities in which we don't have to do everything ourselves, and we could connect and join forces with different universities. The problem is bigger than we can resolve it. I mean, we can contribute to education, but at the core is the political issue. Who approves these certificates? Is UN willing to, accommodate it? Which of the countries are kind of going to support it? And then at the end, which kinds of jobs can you also take on the markets? Because some of the education that is offered for refugees in Jordan, for example, does not necessarily mean that they will be able to use that on the job market, because they're also limited in what one can do. So there's a political problem there as well. But I think still a kind of global mobility and enabling people to move across borders and knowledge is something they can take with them is excellent. As I said earlier, who is teaching whom is important, and it's a question of ethics. I think we also have a lot to learn, and it needs to be a kind of multilateral conversation. For us, it was very important that to always have people from the host community, international groups, and refugee groups doing things together. Only like that you would kind of destabilize that power dynamic, right? And then finally, and that's where we can also learn from artists, like the kind of campuses and camps or projects of mobile universities, or people working with displaced people around the world as teachers. So maybe there are ways in which we can plug in all these educated refugees to actually, support that system and support community internally in disseminating the knowledge between themselves as well.
Yeah, Azra, you really highlight the need for that systems level response, and how do we form those kinds of collaborations with partners on the ground around the world from all different types of experiences and wisdoms. Admir, your thoughts on these new pathways?
Yeah, I totally agree with Azra in a sense, in a way that there are incredible challenges. If we just talk about, refugee communities around the world, and these are traditional challenges that we are used to face. I always like to stress the point that we are heading into new dimensions, new world. That doesn't mean that will include some of the traditional ways of knowledge transfer, of job placement, or anything that is traditional. I think this is where I like kind of what I see. I like the kind of perspective where we could imagine and dream of a better world when it comes to the divide that exists currently between rich and poor. And really the divide in access to high quality education. And again, this is a dream. It might not come true, but I think we need to work more in believing in this and putting more and more tools that actually overcome obstacles that are, between that divide. And I really think that the future of education, for many reasons, is some sort of a combination of online learning and experiential learning. So what this can be, what will be in the future, and what eventually will turn to be efficient in satisfying job demand and types of jobs that will be requested is really a question of future. But I do see an opportunity here to explore unconventional pathways that will really help and be that life-changing event for individuals that currently are completely underserved. So this is where I would love to go and see more of work put in.
Pavel, we'll close with you. What would be your charge to universities, education institutions?
From learners' perspective, I think what university can do is create this open spaces of dialogue where learners can go bring their problems, their concerns, or even just ask for the feedback. There's so many online educational resources, like online courses. You just watch videos, do the problem set, and that's it. And what learners is, I think, lacking is this feedback loop. And they can just talk through problem if they stuck on it. And that's what I think university can have resources and can provide for learners to enhance their learning and education process.
Thank you, Pavel. And here you highlight that need for that holistic support. And I think that's what's also emphasized in Sanjay's keynote, that both not only in person, the hands-on work, but that communities of learners learning together, and how do we leverage the power of digital learning with also then the connected communities, both locally and globally. And that is something we're exploring throughout this Migration Summit over the month, hearing from partners really around the world around how do we develop these new solutions and pathways for displaced communities. So thank you, Pavel, Azra, Admir, for joining me in this panel today. Thank you, Vice President Sanjay Sarma, for your inspiring keynote, and President Reif for sharing your story and wisdom with our community today. And thank you all for being with us today. We invite you to join us throughout the month of April for the Migration Summit as we develop new collaborations and generative ecosystems to support open pathways to education, livelihood, and hope for communities of learners around the world. Thank you and take care.